Well, welcome back to another episode of Social Distancing, also known as Happy Hour with Glenn Hammer. As always, we're joined by the CEO of the Arizona Chamber, Glenn Hammer. And Glenn, once again, we are very fortunate to be joined by an A-list level guest, Jake Logan. Why don't you introduce our guest?
Well, a big fan of Jake Logan's. We've known each other. Jake now is the head honcho of the Arizona Charter Schools Association and just doing a phenomenal job. But Jake and myself go back more than a quarter of a century to the 1994 Kyle for Senate campaign. And we still have this debate, which has never been resolved. So maybe we'll resolve it in this program. Who was lower on the totem pole? I believe that I was, but we're not quite sure. So, Jake, welcome to the show.
Excellent. Thanks for having me, guys.
Jake, let's talk a little bit about running the Charter School Association and working in the education space in a pandemic. You haven't been on the job all that long, and now a crisis has landed on your desk. First of all, start us off. What's it been like to be in the leadership position of the charter schools, and what are you hearing from your members?
Yeah, obviously a very challenging time, but it's sort of an opportunity for innovation to occur as well. And I have been blown away by, and I think a lot of the districts have done the same thing, by the amount of innovation and quick thinking and figure it out. Let's do everything we can to make sure students are getting the education that have came from the association, or not from the association, from our schools and mainly our teachers. They've been so nimble on trying to pivot to, okay, here's how the world has changed and here's what we need to do. And that, I think, has been the upside to the crisis, is how it confirms the dedication of our teachers. I think for us, the key was to be able to do that was fast action by the legislature in a bipartisan basis, the governor and Superintendent Hoffman. Everybody rolled up their sleeves and recognized this was an unprecedented challenge, but we didn't want to take 2.5 or 3 months off for educating students. And so they really pivoted quickly to getting legislation in place, setting the parameters, setting the rules. And I think it's a real credit to our state that when things get tough, our leaders roll up their sleeves and work together. And it was very impressive.
Yeah.
Jake, on the federal side, with the $2.2 trillion CARES Act and some of the legislation that passed before then, can you talk a little bit about the impact on education, particularly in the charter sector in Arizona?
Yeah, so both districts and charters have had expenses that they didn't anticipate as a result of this. They've had to pivot to online platforms, for example, or they had to deliver homework, or they're delivering school lunches. I mean, there's a myriad of things that nobody put in their budgets when they started the year that have came about because of COVID-19. So Congress, I think, was thoughtful in the sense that they have 2 buckets of money as part of the CARES Act for the states for K-12 and education. One is at the governor's discretion, which they're working on right now, which would be able to help both higher ed and K-12 manage through this crisis. And they're working on a proposal to send back to the state, to the U.S. Department of Education. And then the second pot, which is a larger pot of money, is at the state Department of Education. And that's really formula driven. It's really driven by Title I formulas, although I think there are some discretionary dollars that Superintendent Hoffman and her team are looking at on how to allocate to schools around the state. So two zones, 2 buckets of money that I think will be very helpful to help maintain our schools and get them through this and make sure we're in a position to be financially viable through the crisis.
Jake, could you give me just about how much could it break down to, the more formulaic, and what is the discretionary pot that the governor is
the governor's pot, or the pot that the governor's office is working on, is about $60 million. I think it's $59 million. The pot of money that is at the Department of Education is about $275 million. So it's definitely the larger pot of money. And the governor's office pot is also, as I mentioned, for higher ed too. So the universities and the community colleges. But I think everyone has really got a good faith effort to try to figure out where the needs are and how to get those dollars into schools to make sure they help absorb some of these costs that no one had budgeted for.
Yeah.
Then the 275 is K through 12.
Correct. Yep. That's only K through 12. And again, it's driven primarily by formula, which is how Title I dollars are allocated. Now, once a school, a district or a charter gets those dollars, they can spend them on a myriad of things, but that's the way the dollars will be distributed.
We talk a little bit about the distance learning and what this means in terms of just the equipment and the bandwidth. Because now when I can't get online, my girls, they claim it's for schoolwork. I'm still not sure that it's not the latest Netflix offering. But you talk a little bit about that, just how we're doing and where the gaps are, and maybe if there are some additional areas, particularly for the Congress to look at, and whatever is the next package.
Boy, that's a great point, Glenn. I know in the calls that you all have had with Senator Sinema and Senator McSally, they're both very aware of this, but the rural areas are the ones that I worry about the most. We have a school that's in Coconino County, that's on the border of the Navajo Reservation, and the students are spread out everywhere, and there is a digital divide in that case. And so I think as Congress looks at a CARES Act 2.0 or 2.5 or whatever number we're on, right. I think that's a really important factor. And then, frankly, students in underserved areas may not have access to a Chromebook or to the internet. I have been amazed at both the business community's response and helping schools identify, hey, we'll give you some Chromebooks or we'll help you do this, as well as our schools. I mean, they're taking desktops that the person at the front desk uses and getting it into a student's hand. So they're really doing great work. But that would be definitely one, Glenn, if Congress revisits additional resources that keeps me up at night.
Well, I appreciate our colleague at the Phoenix Chamber, Todd Sanders. They've got a great program to collect desktops and iPads and stuff like that. So that's good to hear. It sounds like those types of efforts are having a positive.
They're helping. Yep.
Yeah, Jake, it's a sector that you're in that really it attracts innovators because districts serve as a central clearinghouse, and we can debate whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but in a time like this it could be helpful. Whereas right now you might have some charter operators, they don't necessarily have economies of scale on multiple sites. Some are just single site schools. You've really got to roll up your sleeves to respond to this unique issue right now.
It is. I mean, there's so much diversity. A big district or a big charter system compared to a single site charter school or a very small district, they're just going to have different resources to address it. And that has been a real challenge, is trying to figure out where those gaps are. How do we help them? How do we help them navigate? What are some best practices or things that they can use to try to make sure their students we're doing the best we can to educate those students given the situation. But Garrick, you're exactly right. Economies of scale do matter.
Jake, education policy federally or at a state level, it's complicated enough. But in your sector, we've got the governor's office and the executive branch. You've got the legislature and the legislative branch. You've got the state board of ed. You've got the superintendent. And then you have a regulatory structure in the board of charter schools. Could you just comment on that for people who, for the layperson, might not understand all these divergent panels and give us a sense, are we all playing nice in the same sandbox during this period?
I'll answer the last question first. Yes, which is I've been very impressed with the cooperation from all the different branches you just met. Yeah, it's an interesting situation, right? You have the legislature that appropriates the dollars and has some jurisdiction over how those dollars are spent. You have the governor's office who's running the government. You have a independently elected superintendent of schools who runs the Department of Education. You have a state board of education that a lot of the rules pertain to our schools as well. And then we're primarily governed by the state board for charter schools, which is where a contract, someone who wants to be a charter school operator, they have to approve and manage their contract. So it's kind of a convoluted thing. But again, I really think it's shown the best in Arizona in terms of everyone is working together. Hats off to Superintendent Hoffman and Governor Ducey and the state boards. They've really all worked very well together during this crisis. And there's no doubt in my mind, each one of those agencies is thinking about it students first. How do we make sure students are taken care of? How to make sure students have meals? How do we make sure students are able to learn during this challenge? So it's really kind of a neat, I describe it as an Arizona trait, but it's cool.
Yeah, no, it has been something to watch how well the Governor Ducey and Superintendent Hoffman have gotten along, and it's definitely been to the benefit of all of our kids. Jake, can you give us a snapshot of where the charter school movement is right now in the state of Arizona, just in terms of the percentage of kids, performance, just how things stand at this point in time?
Yeah, it's an ever-evolving and ever-moving number, but currently about 20% of kids in Arizona, closing on 20%, So about 210,000 out of the 1,000,001 students in K-12 attend a charter school. What's interesting, though, is about 50%, at least in Maricopa County, of students use school choice. So whether it's they go to school other than the school they're assigned to, whether it's district to district or district to charter. And so I think school choice is something that Arizonans have really embraced. And it's hard for me to see that going back, because I think parents like the ability to find the best fit for their student. In terms of academic data, we've always got room to improve and grow, but I think generally we continue to do pretty well on the AZ Merit scores. One of the things I'm the most proud of is that students in charter schools from low-income families continue to beat the state average on AZ Merit scores, and I think that's something to be proud of. And I think on the other end of the spectrum, today U.S. News and World Report came out with their list of the best schools in the country, and then a state-by-state analysis. And charter schools fared very well there. We had one of our schools was in the top 10 in the country, which is amazing. And Glenn, I know you've talked about when we're recruiting companies to move to Arizona and they inquire about our education system, having that diversity and having some of those world-class schools, both, again, district and charter, frankly. But my role as a charter school leader, the Charter School Association, has been a real economic, a tool for economic development.
Jake, absolutely, and I know as chair of your board, the one of just sort of in the DNA of the entire organization is on the performance side, and I noticed the U.S. News and World Report. One of my girls goes to BASIS, and once again, out of 20,000 or so high schools, they're just doing super well and filling all sorts of slots on the top 10. But we've got a lot of other schools that are performing at a very, very high level, and it's great. My day job as a chamber president and CEO, I love being able to say that, by the way, you can get a better public school education in the state of Arizona than you can in my home state of New York, in my sister's district of Chappaqua, New York, where the Clintons live. And that is, I just show them an episode, an issue of U.S. News and World Report, and I win the case. So.
Yeah, indeed. It's really, I think, something for Arizona to be proud of. And again, every school isn't right for every student. You have to find the right fit for your own student. But it is, I think, a crown jewel of Arizona to be able to have that kind of choice and to have those kind of options for families.
Well, the open enrollment is really an important thing, because school district boundaries mean less in Arizona than any other place. And from our household, we've had our kids go to all sorts of different schools, always public schools. And right now, 3 out of 3 outside of the assigned district school, 2 in charters, one in a traditional high school. So that choice, you're right, Jake. That's a really important ingredient, and perhaps one of the reasons why Arizona over the years, system-wide, has been making a lot of improvement, a lot of ways to go, but a lot of improvement in our performance.
I totally agree, England. It's districts too. There's been some really cool innovation that came out of school choice, and you look at the new U.S. News and World Report that came out today, there's some districts that are doing some really cool stuff out there too, which, again, to me, at the end of the day, only gives parents more choices, which is a good thing.
At the chamber, we're non-denominational. Whatever schools are doing a great job,
exactly.
we will celebrate them. So
yes, indeed.
Jake, regardless of whether you are an educator in the district setting or the charter setting, when the final bell rings in May, you start to worry about the summer slide, kids coming back unprepared for the start of the next semester. That's got to be, you must be having some really tough conversations in your world right now, because we're not on vacation right now. We're still in school, just in a different setting. And can you just give us a sense of how we continue this upward trajectory of performance, even in this really odd period we're in right now?
Yeah, and this is something that all the education stakeholders have been discussing, because you're right, Garrick. For those of your listeners that haven't heard that term before, usually the first couple of weeks in the fall when kids are back to school, it's a little bit of kind of getting back into the groove and reminding them about last year and kind of getting up to speed, and they call it the summer slide a little bit. Some have feared, and I'm one of them, that because while schools are doing amazing things, it is different, it isn't optimal, that be exacerbated by this crisis. And I think school leaders are going to have to all really work together and roll up their sleeves and do everything we can, again, assuming schools are open in August, which is my assumption, that we'll have to work hard and do that. And I know some schools are thinking about summer school too. We don't have guidance yet on summer school, but even if it's virtual, can they offer voluntary programs for students to help prevent that summer slide, or to maybe make up for a little bit of materials that they lost? And I think that's both on the district and charter side. And I'm hopeful that some of the federal funding that we just discussed will help compensate schools if they choose to go down that road, which is good.
Yeah. Well, I hope now that we're all becoming more acclimated with distance learning, there's less of an excuse now to have that summer slide. So there may be some things that we can do, and they have to be, economically done, but there may be things we can do even well past this pandemic situation where we can help keep kids active through the summer months. And I would actually think that given the disruption already, it is probably something we should think about, because this is something that we may see in scores and learning that may not rinse out even after this is over, whether it's in August or God knows when.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you say, Glenn. I compare it to, after September 11th, the world, one of the things that changed was airport security, and it's never going to go back. We're always going to have that kind of security. What changes, at least in the education space, based on this? Right. And is online a supplement or a component of even most brick and mortar schools? Parents became more comfortable with it. Again, as maybe I go to my class every day, but I have some online tools that can help with my homework. So none of us know, but it'll be interesting to see how if there is a long-term evolution within education.
Jake, before we wrap here, you're dealing with a brush fire right now, but you still have to think ahead to the beginning of the next school year. Does anybody know what the next school year looks like? Or are you planning different scenarios of what it might look like?
Yeah, I think schools are starting to think through different scenarios. It could be you're a student that schools are open, but maybe you just liked online, or maybe you're concerned health-wise or something like that. So I think there has been some discussions there about what next year school year looks like. Hopefully we get through this and everyone stays safe and healthy and we can do it. I do think that the governor has very good judgment and is trying to do the right thing on all these things, as is Superintendent Hoffman. And so I trust their judgment on when things are safe and appropriate to go back. And I'm grateful for their leadership during this time. Thanks,
Jake. Glenn, you want to close us out?
Well, Jake, thanks for being on the show. I guess we're not going to resolve today who is lower on the totem pole.
I think we both know it was me, but you're being nice.
It was close though. But Jake, really appreciate what you're doing. You're a great leader in this state, and we're lucky to have you at the helm of this important role during a very difficult period of time.
Thank you, guys. Chamber's leadership couldn't be any better. Very, very proud to be partnering with you guys, and thank you for having me.
Thanks, Jake. Glenn, we'll catch you next time.
All right.